Once upon a time in the bustling city of Lagos, Nigeria, lived a woman named Maya. She was the stingiest woman anyone could ever meet. Maya wasn't just stingy to others, she was stingy to herself. They called her Gummy Hands because everyone believed her hands were made of glue. If stinginess was an Olympic sport, Maya would have won gold, silver, and bronze medals all by herself because no one came close to her level of miserliness. When it came to being tight-fisted, Maya was legendary. This was a woman who had been wearing the same undergarments for almost 20 years. Even the elastic had given up and resigned from duty, but Maya kept sewing it back together as if it were a matter of national importance. She treated those ancient undergarments like a precious heirloom that must be preserved at all costs. Maya was extraordinarily wealthy. She had so much money that she could buy a private jet and still have plenty left over. Yet despite her vast riches, she lived like a pauper. Her appearance was so shabby that one time, a kind-hearted woman mistook her for a homeless beggar and gave her 10,000 naira to buy new clothes. Maya looked at the woman, smiled sweetly, took the money without hesitation, but instead of buying anything, she locked it up in her savings box at home. That money joined the enormous pile she had already accumulated over the years. Maya did not trust banks to keep her money safe. She firmly believed that bankers were nothing more than trained thieves wearing expensive suits and fake smiles. So she kept all her wealth at home, hidden away where no one except herself knew where to find it. Legend had it that armed robbers once broke into her home in the middle of the night, but after meeting Maya and seeing how she lived, they actually ended up giving her their own money out of sheer pity. They simply couldn't believe that someone living in such conditions could have anything worth stealing. Maya worked as an accountant at a prestigious firm in Victoria Island, which made her obsession with saving even more ironic. All day long, she managed other people's money with precision and care, but when it came to spending her own, she became impossibly stingy. She had enough money to feed her entire neighborhood for years, but to her, every single kobo was worth saving. Every coin had value, every note had purpose, and parting with any of it felt like cutting off a piece of her own flesh. She lived in her father's mansion, a beautiful house that was left to her after her wealthy father passed away. The mansion was a sprawling property with tall gates, a large compound, and architecture that spoke of old money and generational wealth. This impressive residence was the only thing that made those around her believe she was actually wealthy. Many people in the neighborhood assumed she was merely the caretaker of the grand house, maintaining it for some rich relative living abroad. At one point, many believed that her younger cousin Sandra, who lived with her briefly, was the actual owner of the mansion. Sandra dressed well, carried herself with confidence, and looked the part of someone who owned such property. This misconception persisted until the day Maya threw Sandra out for attempting to steal from her, and everyone finally understood the truth. Sandra was Maya's cousin who had shown up at her front door one rainy evening with her bags and a heartbreaking story. Her parents had died a few years earlier, leaving Sandra and her siblings with multiple houses, plots of land, and a substantial amount of money. But in less than 5 years, they had sold everything and squandered the rest on extravagant parties, expensive cars, designer clothes, and elaborate hairstyles. Now homeless and desperate, Sandra remembered her cousin Maya, the famous Gummy Hands, who still had her inheritance completely intact. When Sandra arrived that evening, Maya stared at her suspiciously with narrowed eyes. "You mean all your father's houses are gone?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. Sandra nodded her head slowly and began to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Sister Maya, they're all gone. I've been suffering for months now, sleeping on friends' couches, and I desperately need your help." Maya folded her arms across her chest and gave Sandra a long, hard look. Suffering is good sometimes," she replied matter-of-factly. She then launched into a lengthy lecture about how suffering teaches people valuable lessons about not wasting resources. She spoke about the importance of discipline, the virtue of saving, and the dangers of living beyond one's means. Sandra tried desperately not to fall asleep as she stood there, nodding politely while Maya preached. Eventually, Maya allowed her to stay in the mansion, though with clear reluctance. Sandra initially thought living with Maya would be like a vacation, a temporary respite while she figured out her next move. She couldn't have been more wrong. Maya made her sweep every room daily, cook all the meals, wash clothes by hand, and perform countless other household chores. Sandra wanted to complain bitterly, but the fact that she desperately needed money from Maya made her endure all the discomfort and humiliation. If only she had known from the start that Maya was not one to part with money easily, she would have saved herself the trouble and her energy. If you're enjoying this tale of extreme stinginess, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our captivating African stories. Drop a comment below telling us about the stingiest person you've ever met. One morning, Sandra began to cough dramatically, clutching her chest and moaning loudly. "Sister Maya, my stomach, my chest, my head," she cried out as Maya asked what was wrong with her. "I need surgery urgently," Sandra groaned, clutching a fake hospital report that she had somehow acquired from a corrupt clinic worker who owed her a favor. Maya's face showed concern as she asked how much money was needed for this supposed life-saving procedure. Sandra revealed that she needed 2 million naira for the surgery. "If I don't get it very soon, I will die," she said to Maya with tears streaming down her face, her performance worthy of an acting award. Maya looked at her pitifully and slowly walked toward her bedroom without saying a word. Sandra jumped up in excitement the moment Maya left the room. She began spending the money in her head, planning all the things she would buy, the places she would go, and the debts she would pay off. Her imagination ran wild with possibilities: new clothes, a nice apartment, maybe even a small car. When Maya returned a few minutes later, holding only a cup of water, Sandra's face fell in confusion. "Drink this holy water," Maya said seriously, handing her the cup. She then proceeded to narrate in great detail how this same holy water from her church had healed her of all manner of sicknesses in the past. She spoke of miraculous recoveries, divine interventions, and the power of faith. Sandra stood there completely speechless, holding the cup of ordinary water as if it were poison. She wanted to faint dramatically, but even fainting looked too expensive and exhausting to do at that moment. She could not believe that her cousin had given her tap water blessed by a prayer instead of the 2 million naira she desperately wanted. In that crushing moment of disappointment, Sandra realized that her mission to extract money from Maya would not be easy at all. This woman was operating on a completely different level of stinginess. So Sandra plotted again, and this time she was absolutely certain that her new plan would work perfectly. Sandra connected with a young man named Tun from the neighborhood who agreed to help her for a cut of whatever money she managed to get. Tun introduced himself to Maya as Sandra's fiancé, and they both pretended to be deeply in love. They held hands, exchanged loving glances, and spoke sweetly to each other whenever Maya was around. Sandra arrived home one evening blushing and giggling like a schoolgirl as she informed Maya that she needed money for her traditional introduction ceremony. Maya laughed so hard that she almost rolled on the floor, holding her sides as tears of laughter streamed down her face. "So your husband-to-be cannot pay for his own introduction?" she asked between fits of laughter. Sandra looked at her, embarrassed and frustrated, as Maya simply walked into her room and shut the door firmly in her face. The sound of that closing door felt like a judge's gavel sealing Sandra's fate. The days that followed were filled with one rejection after another as Sandra tried different techniques and schemes to get money from Maya. She pretended to need money for medication, for job interviews, for emergency transportation, every excuse she could think of. After failing repeatedly, Sandra's patience finally ran out completely. She told herself firmly, "If I cannot get the money from this woman through asking, then I will have to take it myself by force." The next morning, while Maya was away at work, Sandra tiptoed quietly into her bedroom. She had noticed over the weeks how Maya always knelt by a particular corner of the room to pray every morning and evening, calling it her treasure base in whispered tones. Sandra carefully searched that area and found a heavy iron box locked with a sturdy padlock. Her heart skipped several beats in her chest as she celebrated silently, already imagining the wealth inside. But just as she reached for the box with trembling hands, a voice suddenly cut through the silence like a knife. "Touch that box, and you will turn to salt." Sandra screamed in terror and dropped the box with a loud crash. Maya walked into her room like an angry soldier preparing for battle, her face contorted with pure rage as she began to speak in a voice that shook with fury. "So you came here to steal from me," she shouted, her voice echoing through the entire house. "You who eat my rice and use my soap. You who sleep under my roof and drink my water." Sandra fell to her knees immediately, begging desperately with tears and snot running down her face. "Sister Maya, please forgive me. I was desperate. I made a terrible mistake," she pleaded. But Maya was not having any of it. Her face remained hard as stone. She ordered Sandra to pack all her belongings and leave immediately. That was how the entire neighborhood came to believe that Sandra owned the house in the first place. All the doubting neighbors stood outside watching in shock as Maya sent Sandra packing with her bags and boxes. They had all believed that Sandra was the wealthy owner and Maya was just a poor relative or employee. But Maya proved them spectacularly wrong on that fateful day, establishing her position as the true owner and mistress of the mansion. From that day forward, people in the neighborhood began to accord Maya the respect that she truly deserved as the mansion's owner. Some brave souls even came to her gates to beg for money, thinking that her newfound fame and the public validation of her wealth might have softened her heart. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Maya's heart remained as hard as concrete when it came to parting with her precious money. Whenever anyone came to her gates to beg, Maya would step out with one hand planted firmly on her waist, scanning the person from head to toe like a human X-ray machine searching for inconsistencies. One day, a woman approached her gate to beg for money for food. "Please, madam, I desperately need 5,000 naira to buy food for my children," she said in a pleading voice. Maya stared hard at the woman's hair and began to speak with withering sarcasm. "How can you be carrying a whole plot of land on your head and still be begging for food?" she asked, pointing at the expensive Brazilian hair woven into the woman's head. The woman instinctively touched the hair extensions on her head, realizing her mistake too late, and walked away disappointed, grumbling underneath her breath about wicked rich people. Another day, a man came to Maya's gate, rubbing his stomach dramatically like an actor in a melodrama. "Madam, please help me," he moaned pitifully. "I have not eaten anything in 2 whole days." Maya looked him up and down very slowly, taking in every detail from his shiny, well-fed cheeks to his prominent potbelly that protruded like a pregnant woman's stomach. She folded her arms and said with brutal honesty, "How can you say you have not eaten in 2 days with this your massive stomach? Because your stomach looks like it is still digesting the mountain of rice you ate on Christmas Day last year. In fact, you do not need food at all. What you desperately need is fasting and prayer. Hunger is trying to help you reduce this excessive load you are carrying around, and here you are fighting against your own destiny." The man opened his mouth in complete shock, unable to respond as Maya advised him to embrace the fast. No one ever came to beg her for money again after that incident, because doing so was clearly a total waste of time and dignity. But as fate would have it, even the stingiest people on earth are not completely immune to the power of love. One sunny day, a man named David moved into the neighborhood. He was a calm, hard-working architect who was tall, had smooth dark skin, and possessed the kind of warm smile that made women stop in their tracks and stare. Every morning, he greeted Maya cheerfully with genuine friendliness, asking how her night had been and wishing her a productive day. At first, Maya completely ignored his friendly overtures, assuming he wanted something from her like everyone else. But then one day during a heavy downpour, everything changed. Maya had flagged down a taxi driver who had the audacity to charge her 5,000 naira just to take her home, a trip that normally cost 1,000 naira. Being the stingy woman that she was, she absolutely refused to pay such an outrageous fare and decided to walk home instead, even though it was a grueling 2-hour walk. Her principled stand ended with her being stranded under the rain, soaked to the bone and shivering. David caught sight of her, standing miserably by the roadside, and immediately gave her a lift in his car, without expecting anything in return. He was like a prince in shining armor who had saved her 5,000 naira. To Maya, that single act of kindness alone made him the most handsome man alive. Anyone who could save her money was automatically elevated to hero status in her eyes. Their conversation during that rainy evening ride led to a friendship that slowly blossomed into a beautiful relationship. David was patient, kind, and never demanded anything from her. When he finally asked her to be his wife several months later, Maya almost collapsed from pure shock. "You mean you actually want to marry a woman like me?" she asked, blinking rapidly like a faulty traffic light, unable to believe her ears. "Yes," David said softly with genuine emotion in his voice as he professed his deep love for her, explaining how he admired her discipline and unique perspective on life. News of their engagement spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and soon Maya's extended family members came crawling out of the woodwork to make their demands known. Her bride price list was as long as an Irako tree, ridiculously detailed and expensive. Maya's family members saw this as their golden opportunity to finally eat from her wealth. After all, David was known to be a successful architect with plenty of money, and they saw absolutely no problem with what they were doing. It was tradition, they claimed, and tradition must be respected no matter the cost. The list contained everything imaginable: 20 massive goats, 500 tubers of yam, 10 enormous kegs of palm wine, and ridiculous items like 500,000 naira for the elders' sitting allowance and 100,000 naira for the village women's refreshment fund. Maya's mouth fell open in horror when she saw the complete list. She could not believe her eyes and began to grumble loudly, asking if her village people were actively trying to kill her before her wedding day even arrived. Maya held up the bride price list like it was a court judgment sentencing her to financial ruin. Her uncles smiled wickedly as they began to speak in unison, clearly enjoying her distress. "That is our tradition, gummy hands. If you want to get married, you must pay up every single item on this list. No negotiations, no substitutions, no exceptions." They thought David would handle everything quietly since he was a wealthy man who could easily afford these expenses. But what they foolishly forgot was that Maya was not a woman who let her money go without an intense fight, even if it technically was not her money being spent. Even though David insisted on paying for everything without complaint, Maya stood over him like a strict auditor reviewing suspicious accounts. "Wait, we are paying 1 million naira just for food," she exclaimed in disbelief. "Who exactly are we feeding with such an amount? And why cannot these people eat properly before leaving their houses to attend the wedding?" David smiled patiently and told her not to worry, because it was their traditional wedding ceremony. "It has to be beautiful and memorable," he said to Maya, who fumed in anger as she tried to think of alternative solutions to reduce costs. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and her father's compound was lavishly decorated with palm fronds, colorful canopies, and cheerful decorations everywhere. Professional caterers worked tirelessly, filling giant cooking pots with jollof rice, egusi soup with assorted meats, goat meat pepper soup, fried rice, and even mounds of pounded yam with various soups. People came from far and wide to witness the union, and Maya's uncles arrived extremely early, rubbing their hands together in greedy excitement, eagerly waiting to enjoy the feast that they believed rightfully belonged to them. They had strategically positioned themselves near the food section like soldiers waiting for battle to begin, their eyes tracking every movement of the caterers. David was smiling broadly, greeting guests warmly, taking pictures, and playing the role of the happy groom perfectly. But Maya was not smiling at all. She was pacing around anxiously, calculating expenses in her head, her face twisted with worry about every naira being spent. Then she overheard her uncles laughing loudly and boasting amongst themselves about how they would chop her money properly on that very day. They salivated openly as the caterers carefully arranged the food in coolers within their designated canopy. Maya snapped when she heard their mocking laughter and crude comments. Her face hardened like concrete as she marched determinedly toward the elder's canopy, her eyes blazing with fury. What happened next shocked everyone present. Maya picked up a serving spoon and began eating all the food that was meant for the elders. At first, everyone thought she was joking or performing some kind of traditional ritual. But Maya was dead serious. She ate like a hungry lioness that had not seen food in weeks. She moved from one cooler of food to another, mixing egusi soup with fried rice, throwing in chunks of goat meat, completely ignoring all the shocked stares from the bewildered guests. Her uncles tried desperately to stop her, but Maya reminded them loudly that all she owed them were the specific items listed on the bride price document. The food at my wedding is an added bonus that I paid for separately, and I do not feel like giving any of it to you greedy people, she declared between mouthfuls. Her uncles were too stunned to speak coherently. They stood there helplessly and watched as Maya devoured all the food in the coolers meant for them. She ate until her stomach protruded prominently like that of a woman 9 months pregnant. When the guests began to murmur loudly in confusion and shock, Maya stood up, wiped her mouth dramatically with the back of her hand, and began to address the crowd. My uncles think that they have superior sense and wisdom. They believe that they could reap abundantly from where they did not sow even a single seed and get away with it easily. Well, I have shown them today that absolutely no one takes anything from me by force. Not today, not ever. The entire village erupted in a mixture of laughter, applause, and shocked gasps. Some people clapped and cheered her boldness, while others shook their heads in complete disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Her uncles were thoroughly humiliated as they whispered underneath their breath while gathering their things to leave. This one is not ordinary stinginess. This is a supernatural problem that requires serious spiritual intervention. They muttered to themselves as they walked out of the wedding venue, completely defeated and embarrassed. David stood in stunned silence, staring at the woman he had just married. His mind raced with questions about whether he had made the right decision. He knew fully well that Maya was stingy. She had never hidden that aspect of her personality, but he had absolutely no idea that her stinginess had graduated with highest honors and a doctorate degree. That night, after all the chaos and drama of the wedding had died down, David sat on the edge of their bed staring blankly at the wall, his mind racing with thoughts. Meanwhile, Maya snored loudly beside him like an exhausted pig after a feast. He wondered what other shocking behavior she might display after witnessing everything that had happened at their wedding. The image of her eating all that food would be permanently burned into his memory. Days passed, and David lovingly booked an expensive trip to Dubai for their honeymoon, hoping to create romantic memories with his new wife. But when Maya heard the word honeymoon, she jumped up from her seat like a startled cockroach. Honeymoon? For what purpose? She asked David with genuine confusion on her face. David smiled gently and began to speak in his most persuasive voice. My love, it is just a small trip to Dubai, a special time for us to relax, bond, and enjoy ourselves as husband and wife away from all the stress here. Maya's eyes widened in absolute horror at the suggestion. Dubai? You mean that expensive place that will completely finish all our hard-earned money? No, we absolutely do not need such wasteful luxury here, she declared firmly. David laughed, genuinely thinking that she was joking or negotiating for a different destination. But Maya was not joking even slightly. That was how their honeymoon ended before it even began, canceled without any further discussion. Days turned into weeks, and David discovered that living with Maya was like living in an austere wilderness monastery. Every single day felt like a religious fast because Maya only cooked one meal per day, claiming it was healthier and more economical. Even when she did cook, she measured all the ingredients like they were components of a critical scientific experiment. Maya monitored absolutely everything in their home with militant precision. The toothpaste usage, the amount of cooking oil used, water consumption, and even the number of times her husband flushed the toilet. David, she would shout from the living room. I heard 2 flushes from bathroom. What exactly are you flushing twice? Are you wasting water? David could not believe what his life had become. Sometimes he would just sit on the edge of their bed and stare at the ceiling, wondering seriously if he had married an actual woman or a human calculator program to count everything. The only time Maya's face genuinely lit up with joy was when she was counting her money in private, running her fingers lovingly over each bundle of notes. David advised her repeatedly to take all that money to the bank for safety, but Maya was absolutely not willing to listen to such foolish suggestions. She continued to live her miserly life, denying herself and her husband so many simple pleasures, all in her obsessive quest to save every possible kobo. David even began hiding in different parts of the house just to enjoy basic things like extra food or a longer shower without his wife's constant monitoring and criticism. Their marriage was far from the fairy tale that it should have been. Maya was more like a strict prison warden than a loving wife. Every single day, she locked the kitchen like a bank vault, kept the sugar container hidden under her pillow, and actually counted individual grains of rice before cooking to ensure nothing was wasted. Months passed, and Maya's obsession with saving money grew progressively worse. She spent every spare moment counting and recounting her money, organizing it, and planning how to accumulate even more. David finally confronted her one night, asking why she was so stingy even to herself. "You have so much money, Maya, but still you count and ration everything as if you can barely afford to survive. Why do you live this way?" Maya hissed in annoyance and replied that his wasteful mindset was exactly the reason why so many people remain poor throughout their entire lives. David, in an attempt to respond, angrily informed her that he was extremely uncomfortable with so much cash being kept in their home. "It is simply not safe," he said firmly. Maya promised half-heartedly to do something about it, just to end the argument. The next morning, Maya took a drive back to her father's mansion. She buried all her money inside the house in a secret location and locked everything up securely before returning to her husband's house. Weeks later, she fell seriously ill but stubbornly refused to go to the hospital. Maya claimed that doctors were government agents who overcharged patients unnecessarily for simple treatments. Instead, she drank warm water, tied a wrapper tightly around her head, and promised herself that she would feel better very soon through sheer willpower. After 3 long, miserable weeks, she finally recovered from whatever illness had struck her. Her very first thought upon feeling better was about her money. Maya rushed frantically to her father's mansion to dig it up and verify it was still safe. She grabbed a shovel and began to dig in the spot where she had buried her precious iron box. At first, she smiled and hummed a cheerful song to herself as she worked. Minutes later, her shovel hit the iron box, and she smiled widely in excitement and relief. Maya carefully brushed all the dirt from the box and decided to open it immediately to count her money. The next sound that filled the empty compound was a scream so loud and piercing that even the birds in nearby trees scattered in terror, fleeing for their safety. Inside the box, where millions of naira once lay neatly stacked, there was nothing remaining but fine dust and debris. Hundreds of termites crawled actively over what used to be her life's treasure. "Jesus Christ!" she screamed repeatedly, slapping her chest in anguish as she grabbed one of the few remaining notes. It crumbled like a dry biscuit and fell to the floor in pieces. The termites had systematically eaten everything. Every single note, every carefully saved bundle, everything that she had painstakingly accumulated over many years. Maya was completely heartbroken and devastated. She arrived home hours later in a daze of shock and grief, only to meet David's mother, who had brought another woman to their house. "What kind of useless wife are you?" the old woman shouted the moment Maya stepped through the door. "How dare you starve my son like a prisoner? What kind of wicked woman treats her husband this way?" Maya stood frozen in place as she watched her mother-in-law introduce another woman as her son's new wife. The sweet aroma of a well-prepared, abundant meal filled the entire house as Maya stood there feeling like a complete stranger in her own home. Her mouth opened to speak, but no words came out. She looked at the dining table, which was now elaborately set with the kind of generous food portions that she had never once given to David. David looked at her with deep embarrassment visible on his face as he walked up to the table and began eating the other woman's food. "What is going on here?" Maya finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Her mother-in-law revealed that she was completely tired of watching her beloved son starve in the name of marriage. "You have turned this house into a hunger camp and a torture chamber. If I had not come here today, my son would have joined our ancestors in the grave from starvation. So I have brought a proper wife for him, a real woman who knows how to cook, clean, and feed her husband properly. This is a real woman who understands her duties. What is this your nonsense calculator marriage, where even toothpaste is measured and rationed like gold? It ends today." Maya felt her knees weaken as she watched David thoroughly enjoying another woman's cooking, smiling and laughing with her. It was as if her whole world was shattering into a million pieces right before her eyes. In one single devastating day, she had lost all her money to termites, and now she was losing her husband to another woman. In that overwhelming moment, she felt extremely dizzy and fell to the ground, unconscious. Hours later, she woke up and found herself lying in bed. Maya sat up abruptly, gasping desperately for air, her heart pounding as if it wanted to escape from her chest. Beads of sweat rolled down her forehead as David walked into the room to check on her. Maya could not contain her rage and confusion. She immediately asked about his new wife and where she was. David looked at her with genuine puzzlement, asking what on earth she was talking about. It was in that shocking moment that Maya realized it had all been a terrible dream, a nightmare so vivid it felt completely real. The horrifying images of the termites devouring all her life savings and her husband smiling happily at another woman replayed in her mind like a traumatic movie. She could not stop. Maya quickly jumped out of bed and threw on her clothes with trembling hands. She rushed to her father's house immediately, hoping and praying desperately that her money was still intact and that the termite disaster was only part of the nightmare. After several anxious minutes of digging, she found a box and opened it. A scream of pure joy cut through the silence as she realized that her money was still perfectly there, every single bundle clean, crisp, and completely untouched. No termites, no dust, no destruction whatsoever. Just her neatly stacked savings waiting for her like loyal soldiers standing at attention. Tears of overwhelming joy poured down her face uncontrollably. "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, God," she cried out loud, laughing and sobbing simultaneously in emotional relief. Maya sank to her knees as she began to speak softly to herself with newfound clarity. If this is what my stinginess can potentially cause, if this is how easily I could lose absolutely everything that truly matters, then God, I have finally learned my lesson, she declared to herself as she made a firm decision to change her ways completely. Maya went directly to the market and bought ingredients to cook a huge, generous pot of soup for David for the very first time since their marriage. She did not count the ingredients obsessively or limit the portions that she served him. Maya served her husband like he was royalty, with huge portions of meat so large that one would think it was his last meal on earth. David walked into the house that evening, sniffing the air suspiciously like a confused detective. "Maya," he called out hesitantly. She walked out of the kitchen with a genuine smile, warmly welcoming him home. "Dinner is ready, my dear," she announced cheerfully. David blinked repeatedly and stared at her in utter disbelief. "Dinner? Like actual, real dinner with proper food?" he asked Maya, who laughed warmly and pointed at the elaborately set dining table. David stared at her in amazement, hardly believing his eyes. "Who are you, and what have you done with my wife?" he asked, only half joking. Maya smiled and walked toward him lovingly. "Your wife had a powerful dream," she said softly with emotion in her voice. "A dream that taught her what really matters in this life. A dream that showed her what she could lose if she did not change." That night, they ate together, laughed together genuinely. And for the very first time since their marriage began, their house was filled with warmth, love, and contentment instead of stinginess and tension. From that transformative day forward, Maya changed completely and permanently. She stopped hoarding mindlessly and started giving generously. She even went further to buy herself new clothes and shoes, deposited her money safely in the bank, and began living like a normal, balanced person. Maya had learned her lesson the hard way through that vivid nightmare. She discovered that money kept without purpose or joy is as useless as sand in the desert. The profound lesson to be learned from this story is that life is not about how much you manage to save and hoard, but about how much love, joy, and comfort you give to others. Stinginess may fill your purse temporarily, but will inevitably end up completely emptying your heart and soul. A person who hoards excessively will one day realize that money cannot buy genuine laughter, cannot purchase real love, and cannot bring lasting peace to a lonely home. Maya discovered that true wealth is not measured by what you keep locked away in boxes and bank accounts, but by the happiness, warmth, and comfort you bring to those around you, especially the people you love most. The end. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story of transformation. If this tale touched your heart or taught you something valuable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing African stories. Share this with your friends and family who need to hear this message. What did you learn from Maya's journey? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story. See you in the next video.